The honor is mine, my loyal child. Director Cermak. Again, fine suit.
The whole point of the genetic dynasty is that they're all fundamentally, or I guess more specifically, genetically the same. This is a way to maintain continuity and extend Cleon I's rule long after his death, but it's also meant to foster a bond that ensures that they'll always put their position above any sense of individuality that might develop. If this is working like it's supposed to, it shouldn't be possible to sow division between the Cleons or pit them against each other. The finale of Season 1 set up the beginning of the end of that dynamic, and throughout Season 2 we've watched Day's sense of individuality lead to this plan of marrying Queen Sareth to produce an heir, thus bringing the Cleonic dynasty as it existed to an end. Foundation Episode 204 makes the intriguing decision to not include Brother Day at all. Instead, we see how the other characters that exist in his orbit are reacting to his decisions, and all the jockeying that goes along with that. And away from Trantor, Episode 3 ended with the big reveal that Harry's consciousness got a brand new body to inhabit while on Una's world. But we don't catch up with him or Gaal or Salvor either. This makes room for us to get to know the new Season 2 specific characters better, but it doesn't mean that we don't get any Harry at all, because we do finally get to reunite with the version of his consciousness that resides in the vault on Terminus. The episode opens on the Church of Seldon's whisper ship, the Spirit. There, Brother Constant, who is still visibly smitten by their new passenger Hober Mallow, inquires about the bottle of wine he's been carrying around with him. There is a backstory, that it's from a planet with a permanently sunny side, which makes the grapes extra sweet, and because the Empire nuked the planet, this truly is a rare vintage. What seems more important here, though, is that he's been holding on to it for 15 years, waiting for the right thing to celebrate, and that detail convinces Constant that he's an optimist. This is something that he disagrees with on the face of it, which brings to mind the idea of perspective. She's not necessarily wrong, but it does require some spin, and she only recognizes this because she wants it to be true. They do return to Terminus and make their way to the vault. Before I get into what happens there, I just want to point out a couple of things that made me laugh. First, Hober wears the Commodore's jacket throughout the episode as a result of their castling, and that's a gift that keeps on giving. And then when he sees his name on the vault and turns to Poly to say, "What's going on here? This isn't the way it works. It doesn't work like this." I suppose you need to be careful to not overdo something like this, but I love when a show anticipates the way that fans will react to choices that they make. That is to say, WTF, why is Vault Harry putting an individual's name out there and calling for a specific person? And then they make light of that down the road. After seeing the stain left behind on the ground by the previous warden, Hober does try to refuse to enter, but then the vault pulls him in against his will. Constant is happy to follow him. Poly is also curious, but a little worried, so he goes in as soon as he sees that she makes it okay. And Director Cermak initially stays outside, but eventually changes his mind and enters as well. They wander around lost until they eventually find what looks like Harry's office at Streeling University on Trantor. There's a lot of scientific terminology thrown around here as explanations for how the vault operates. I'm not going to dwell on it too much because some of it is grounded in things that are familiar to sci-fi fans. But then some of it is an unconcerned Harry waving things off by saying things like time slips in here, and the vault manipulates molecules, and everything is molecules and things like that. This version of Harry is noticeably much different than the tortured version who's on the beggar with Gaal. It's interesting to think about how much of that is by design, how much is due to being trapped in isolation for 138 years, and how much is about Gaal's outlier status that exists right next to these gifts that she has that put her on his level in relation to understanding psychohistory. As far as we can tell, Vault Harry has his stuff together, though, and it's fun to watch him operate. He compliments Director Cermak without really engaging in anything the man has to say, and he calls Brother Constant his child as he touches her head after saying that he can see the Foundation has entered its religious phase. He plays into that idea of perspective that I mentioned earlier and answers some questions to make everyone feel special without giving away too much about his plan. He tells them that he was waiting for everyone to arrive before he revealed himself because he needs them all. When they ask what they can do, he tells them that he needs them to prevent a war. This is a big surprise, which we see through the look on the director's face, since because of what he said the last time he appeared, they've been preparing for war for generations at this point. The always curious Poly notices the Prime Radiant sitting on his desk. He asks how that's possible for him to have it because Salvor Hardin took it with her when she left over a century ago. Hari explains that the Radiant is a quantum computer that exists in a state of superposition. This can get a little complicated, so it's probably best to think of it in the way that Poly suggests, that it's an object that exists in two places at the same time. This would involve some entanglement and might have something to do with how he came upon Hober Mallow's name, but we'll have to wait and see how much more of this they explain. For what it's worth, he tells Hober that a passing ghost dropped his name, which doesn't explain anything at all. Before they can get too lost in the science of the Prime Radiant or the Vault for that matter, Constant changes the subject, asking how they can serve their prophet. The director is all pumped up to step up to the long-anticipated second crisis, but Hari explains that what he really needs is for the clergy to go to Trantor and open diplomatic relations. They know how to sell the Foundation. The 7 planets they've recruited in the Outer Reach so far are proof of that, and they like the idea of being agents of peace. So he sends them on their way with purpose. The director is a little confused when Hari compliments him on his nice suit again rather than, talking to him. But I guess that's what a god can do if he feels like it. But he does notice that Poly has something on his mind. He wants to know why he killed the warden. Here he makes the claim that for a god to be effective, he has to be intermittently wrathful. Then he adds that he heard what he was saying out there and poses the question of how long it would have been before the warden declared himself the only holy vessel of his spirit. This idea of divine judgment strikes a chord with Poly and will likely lead to him considering how he lives his life. He does pass on the drink of wine here, which is in stark contrast to his responding to Constant's quip earlier about witnessing prophecy by taking a bump of Vordaline dust. He has Hober stay back so they can have a private conversation. They bond briefly in that they both grew up with physically abusive fathers but were able to get out, but Hari makes the distinction that maybe Hober did this through dishonest means. He admits that he might have sold some questionable relics, and refers back to those finger bones that Poly was talking about in the last episode, but points out that the church is selling miracles, and in a way they're just running a different confidence game, which is a point that Hari doesn't contend. Instead, he says it feeds growth, which is something they need, and refers to it as a developmental stage that all civilizations go through, although some never escape it. He tells them the church will fall away with time, and he starts to tell him what it'll be replaced with, but then pauses, realizing he doesn't want to say too much, and leaves it at there will be another mechanism. In this case, he finds Hober's skepticism helpful, because this group he's sending him to treat with are rightfully wary. They wouldn't be likely to respond to a spiritual approach. So Hober is going somewhere different than the drunk and the monk. And it sounds like Hari is trying to hedge his bets, because he says a person who extends an open hand in friendship had better have a blade and a fist behind his back. And of course, Hober likes this idea. He says he can be a blade and just wants to know where he's being thrust. And we do see Hari open the Radiant to give him an idea, but they don't fill us in. When he emerges from the vault, we see it close back up. He explains to the others that he's going to take the spirit somewhere else. And when Poly goes to collect their belongings, Constant comes clean about her ideas of where their relationship was heading. He was eventually going to grow fond of her, and he was going to add her to his list of bed partners. He was going to be her first, and this is an idea that he doesn't really like. But what it all boils down to is that she's worried this is the last time they'll see each other. And I have to say, this is the point where I started to think about this voiceover that's been going on since their first scene in the beginning. Gaal is talking about how if your parents never met, you wouldn't exist. Of course, that's against the backdrop that psychohistory doesn't care, but this idea that everyone in the universe is a result of a unique set of parents doesn't really fit with anything else that's going on in the episode, so I have to think that this may be foreshadowing that these two might indeed see each other again, and that there may be a child that comes out of this situation. And speaking of important babies, Queen Sareth and Enjoiner Rue return after not showing up in episode 3, and we get a much better idea of what each of them is up to. I mean, they are working together, but Rue still has to do some convincing to get Sareth on board with this imperial marriage. There's a brief exchange where Rue questions her plan to meet Brother Dawn without her pigments, where Sareth explains it's all part of her plan. It's psychological. Dawn will feel like she's revealing herself, making him want to open up. This shows that Sareth isn't entirely unprepared for her role as Dominion's leader as she led on, and also that Rue has some influence, but maybe not as much as she would like, because her goal is to make this marriage happen. And it's revealed here that Sareth is much more interested in finding out if Day was behind her family's tragic accident. She goes to meet with Dawn, who would be elevated to Cleon the 18th and rule the galaxy if this marriage didn't happen. He seems to be a good sport about it, all things considered, and it looks like her courtesan tricks seem to work on him. It's interesting that she tests him in some of the ways she did with Day, like when she refers to Dusk as his grandfather when she reveals that he slept with Rue in the past, but that she does it with Dawn in a more innocent and playful way. She's looking for an angle, a way to get important people on her side, and after she denies any involvement in Day's assassination attempt, she makes her intentions plain. She wants to find out if Cleon the 17th had her family killed. Dawn reflexively answers no, but then asks if there's evidence, which gives her confidence in him. She points out that she was a million steps from the throne, and not a single person ahead of her in the line of succession would have made this alliance. This one crash changes everything and leaves her ruling a weakened Dominion. Dawn counters that other people benefited as well. Enjoiner Rue, who was elevated from concubine, would become the most trusted advisor of an empress after all. But you can see that he's considering the possibility. Sareth does a little more acting, saying that she just wants to know if Day is capable of something like that, because, she's going to spend the rest of her life with him. And since the story is that they're the same man, that forces Dawn to consider his position. He doesn't think that he would be capable of doing something like that, but he does like to think that he could become capable of it. Then he adds the caveat that it would have to have been before he got to know her and got to like her. And she lets him know that she likes him too. And pretty much everyone involved sees that there might be some value to them becoming allies. On her way out, she brings up the idea that they are the same man, and if he ever wondered why they didn't have them marry, they're kind of closer in age. It does kind of make sense. It's a good question. And his face says that he's thinking about that now too. Apparently, Dusk has been thinking about Rue quite a bit. He approaches her while she's admiring his work on the mural. There's quite a bit of flirting mixed in with their diplomacy. They are doing their work here. And then they take a trip to where they first met, Gossamer Court, which is kind of weird. He confirms that he was the one that slept with her all those years ago. And they have a little back and forth about the coming marriage and how no one really supports it except for Rue and Brother Day. And that would include the Queen, and it also implies that Dusk isn't really behind it either. He tells her that he never talked to someone after erasure, because remember, when people sleep with them, they have their memories erased afterward. And he just throws it out there that since she doesn't remember, they can go back to his place and check out the sex tape they made all those years ago. This time she will remember it, and I don't know how you would suggest such a thing if you weren't hoping that it would lead to more sex. But I guess more than that, we see Dusk has his own stuff going on, and that Rue is probably doing to him what Sareth was trying to do with Dawn. And about those memories, turns out that they studied Rue's memory tampering when she returned to Dominion after her Gossamer Court hookup with Cleon the 16th, and developed tech that could reverse the process. We find this out when she goes back to Dawn's banyan tree spot, or whatever his secluded grove is, and meets up with an Imperial guard that they're trying to recruit. He doesn't know if he can help her figure out if they killed her family, but he does think he knows where to begin. It seems like he's just doing this because he needs money, and she assures him that his price will be met, because she's absolutely loaded. She'd also like to know how they survived an attempt by the galaxy's best assassins, and wants to see the visual records of the attempt. Based on the fact that it doesn't really make sense for her to try to kill him before they get married, I believe her when she says she wasn't involved in that. So I guess she wants to know what happened to get a better understanding of what she's getting herself into. Because at the end of the day, she may end up married to Day and ruling the galaxy by his side. Bel Riose arrives at Siwenna and gets himself right into the middle of things. He's going there to question the informant about the magicians, and decides to try to slip in and out with Gaal without anyone noticing. They send down an extraction pack that gets picked up by the locals, and that provides Bel with the chance to kick some ass. He didn't start it, he just escalated it, and he enjoys this quite a bit after being locked up for 6 years, but it causes some concern with his husband that we'll come back to. They make it to the contact's house, which turns out to be the old man I pointed out as being up to something in episode 2, who also turns out to be Ducem Barr, which is a familiar name for book readers. They use the title of the episode here as a code phrase, which is pulled directly from Foundation and Empire. The magicians I've mentioned come from beyond out there, beyond the frontier guards, where the stars are scattered thinly, to which Barr responds and the cold of space seeps in. He's been sending dispatches to Empire for 40 years, and no one's answered him until now. It's a pretty thankless post he's got there, and they notice his books and start to look through them. Gaal is taken by his copy of the Bhagavad Gita, and Ducem explains what it's about. There's this idea that books are for old men. Half of the stories told about the old days are mythical. That also comes from the original story as well. I mentioned this potential rift between Bel and Gaal, and we see a little bit more of that here when Bel gives the toast, "Here's to those who fight," and he leaves off the end and asks why, which shows the difference in the way that he's looking at things after his incarceration and how he might not be the same person he was whenever he first met his husband. This feels like it's setting something up for the rest of the season and kind of the things that he'll have to deal with as he works through this. But as for what's going on here, they see that the Foundation has outpaced the Empire in technology. They see that they have personal auras and that there are rumors that the vault on Terminus contains the spirit of the late Dr. Seldon. Plus they have these whisper ships that can jump without the navigation of spacers. And all of this is concerning. They could jump right into Trantor's space. This is all stuff they extrapolated from Imperial tech. And bottom line, they're doing things that they're not supposed to be doing, like having evolutionary AI, and it makes them much more of a threat than what he thought originally. Before they can get too deep into it, the local constabulary arrive. Ducem shows them an escape route that will get them to the roof, and then asks Bel to shoot him in a very casual manner. He's already poisoned himself, and this is just a mercy killing for a man who has lived a long life. And Bel decides to oblige him with the more dignified death of a particle beam to the head. They activate their extraction pack, that shoots them off into space, and that's just about everything that happened in the episode. It's really surprising how enjoyable this episode was without Brother Day and Demerzel, or Hari, Gaal, and Salvor. A lot of it works as setup, but we got a lot of important details that expand our understanding of where this season is going. I enjoyed the differences between Dr. Seldon and Hari. It was fun to watch him work the room while at the same time backing up the idea that Foundation without a second Foundation to guide them just becomes Empire all over again. I think the time in the vault provided some of the most genuinely funny material they put together, which is a nice compliment to the struggles that exist in the other Hari story. The supporting characters all continue to grow on me, and the explanations for things that were confusing, like Hober's name showing up on the vault, are promising. Speaking of Hober, where is he going? Who is he meeting? I don't think they really tipped their hand on that one yet. Sending Poly and Constant to treat with the Emperor seems like a bad idea, and you have to wonder if Hari knows that and just doesn't really care if they end up dead as a result. This version of Hari, which I guess we should call Dr. Seldon, has a lot of that going on. There's a lot of gray area stuff where you're not really sure. He's very likable, but you don't know if you can trust what his motivations are. I am glad that Sareth's motivations are out there now. Focusing on Dawn seems like a smart move, and ditto for Rue working on Dusk. I like seeing these Cleons operating on their own and hope we get more insight into how they adapt to Dace's plans to end the dynasty. It's sort of an open question for me. Dace seems to be driving the bus and they don't really have a say. How do they react to that? This version of Dawn actually seems to be more competent and together than the current Day, which should add to his side story with Sareth. None of these people seem to be behind the assassination attempt, and she really only seems to be concerned about her family's accident. But to loop back around to how I started the video, this genetic drift, or whatever's going on between the current crop of Cleons, really has set up the perfect storm where things can go off the rails in ways that weren't possible before. It's fertile ground for some spicy palace intrigue. It really jumped out to me that they lingered so much on different parts of the mural without mentioning anything about what it was depicting. It seemed very intentional, and it seems certain that these things will make sense later. I have no idea what the guy with the triangles is supposed to represent, and thought the choice to depict the image from Demerzel's toolkit, which has a picture of our solar system on it, was something to pay attention to. Just like Constant can't quit paying attention to Hober. I do think there's something going on there based on the voiceover, something to come in the future, and for the most part, it's been fun to watch. I was 50-50 on the Bel Riose scenes. The insertion and extraction tech and really the plan to send the most important person on the ship in this way to the surface doesn't do much for me. That was probably the low point, the whole fight and everything, even though it did serve a purpose. On the other hand, all the nods to book readers with Ducem Barr were incredibly satisfying. I thought they handled it well because it's a ton of fan service, sort of, but the scene still works even if you haven't read the source material. And the way they set up the reveal of who he was and what they were talking about, it was all just really well put together from my point of view. And the actor did a fantastic job in his role. Another good week all around in the Books to Show department. Dr. Seldon explaining the developmental stages that all civilizations go through, his detached view of the church and his willingness to use their faith to get them to do what he wants anyway. Seeing Riose realize that the Foundation has outpaced the Empire's tech due to their stagnation was good to see. And lots of direct references, so let's hope they keep going in that direction. And I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.